The marker squeaked against the whiteboard, and with every stroke, a name disappeared. Sergeant A. Thompson. Thompson A. Abigail Thompson. Each version crossed out in red ink, one after another, until nothing remained but 2 words scrawled beneath them. And no longer applicable. She stood 3 feet away, holding a folder with her own handwriting inside it, watching a room full of men decide she had never existed. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Her name was Abigail Thompson, and for 6 years she had been the quiet architecture behind operations that made careers for men who never learned to spell her last name correctly. She was not the kind of soldier who raised her voice in briefings. She didn't need to. She was the one who noticed the gap in a supply route 3 days before anyone else did. The one who redrew a map at 2 in the morning because something about the terrain felt wrong in her gut before it felt wrong on paper. She carried her competence quietly, like a folded knife in her pocket. Always there, rarely shown, devastating when it mattered. That morning had started like any other. Coffee gone lukewarm before she finished it. A stack of files on her desk thick enough to prop a door open. And a message from command that she read twice because the first time, she refused to believe it. Her clearance was being reviewed. Her name was being pulled from active mission documentation. Pending an internal audit neither she nor her direct commander had been briefed on. No explanation. No warning. Just a line item in a memo cold as a closed door. She walked into the operations room that afternoon to find a young lieutenant already at the whiteboard, marker in hand, erasing her from history one alias at a time. He didn't look at her. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe some small, decent part of him understood what he was doing and simply refused to make eye contact with the person he was doing it to. The folders on the table beside her told the rest of the story. A tower of case files, each one stamped removed. No record. Her name struck through on every cover like a debt that had finally been called in. 6 years of nights she couldn't get back. Sealed away as if they'd never happened. She thought she'd never be believed. She was wrong. Because across the room, on the largest screen in the building, a single phrase glowed in green light. Mission status. Complete. Operation Nighthawk. The very operation her strategy had built from nothing, the one that had, 3 days earlier, brought an entire unit home alive when every projection said half of them wouldn't make it. She had drafted that plan alone, in the dead hours between midnight and dawn, when the building was empty except for the hum of servers and her own stubborn refusal to sleep until the numbers made sense. She set her jaw and walked forward, past the man erasing her name, past the folders stamped with her erasure, and picked up the one document nobody had thought to remove yet. The strategic overview of Operation Nighthawk itself. Her fingerprint was still pressed into the corner of the page, faint but unmistakable, left there the night she'd signed off on the final draft with hands still trembling from too much coffee and too little certainty. She held it up, not as a plea, as a fact. The room went still in that particular way rooms go still when something has shifted and everyone feels it before anyone says it aloud. Even the young lieutenant paused mid-stroke, marker hovering over the last visible fragment of her name. Somewhere behind her, a chair creaked as someone leaned forward. Nobody spoke. Dust drifted lazily through a shaft of light from the overhead lamps, indifferent to the tension gathering beneath it. Colonel Harrison, seated at the far table, looked up from the report he'd been reading without urgency. He was the kind of officer who had learned, over 30 years of service, that the loudest voice in a room is rarely the one worth trusting. He studied her for a long moment. Then his eyes moved to the document in her hand, to the smudge of a fingerprint that no clerical order could erase, no matter how many red lines were drawn through a name on a whiteboard. Here is where the story asks something uncomfortable of everyone watching. Was this an injustice born of malice, or the cold, faceless machinery of bureaucracy simply grinding forward without anyone pausing to check what it was grinding through? Nobody in that room hated her. Nobody had set out to erase a good soldier's legacy out of cruelty. And yet intention doesn't return 6 years to someone. It doesn't undo the quiet indignity of watching your own name crossed out like a typo. Sometimes the most dangerous harm isn't committed by villains at all. It's committed by systems, and by people too busy, too rushed, or too indifferent to ask if the paperwork in front of them was actually true. Harrison rose from his seat. The room seemed to hold its breath collectively, the way a crowd does in the second before an outcome is announced, when hope and dread occupy the exact same heartbeat. He crossed the room slowly, footsteps deliberate against the floor, until he stood in front of her and took the document from her hand. He studied the fingerprint, then the strategic notes beneath it, notes only someone with her precise understanding of the terrain, the timing, the human cost of every decision could have written. He turned to the lieutenant still frozen at the whiteboard. "Put the marker down," he said. Quiet but final, the way orders are final when they come from someone who has never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. He turned back to her. "This audit," he said, "was based on a clerical flag. A name-matching error in the new record system. It should have taken an hour to clear. Took 6 days because nobody thought to ask the person whose name it was. There is a particular kind of silence that follows an apology nobody expected to receive. It isn't relief, not exactly. It's the sound of a held breath finally let go, mixed with the ache of knowing the damage, however brief, was still real while it lasted." She didn't cry. She had spent too many years training herself not to, in rooms exactly like this one. But something in her shoulders loosened, some tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying since the memo arrived that morning. Harrison turned to the room. "Every file on that table gets restored. Every name on that board gets rewritten correctly this time." He paused, and something almost gentle entered his voice. "Sergeant Thompson built the strategy that brought our people home 3 days ago. She doesn't need us to remember that, but we owe it to her to remember it anyway." The young lieutenant set the marker down and, without being asked twice, began rewriting what he had erased. This time in black ink, permanent and unhurried. One by one, the folders on the table were uncapped, restamped, restored, not out of guilt alone, but because the truth, once seen clearly, has a way of demanding to be corrected. A few of the other soldiers in the room, the ones who had watched in uncomfortable silence, began to nod, quiet murmurs of agreement rippling outward like something finally settling into place. She picked up the strategic overview once more, her fingerprint still pressed faintly into the corner, and looked at it not as evidence anymore, but as what it had always been, proof of work done in the dark, by someone who never expected applause, only the quiet satisfaction of a mission completed and people brought home safe. Because kindness doesn't vanish. It waits, and it finds its way back. And sometimes the truth about who we are isn't written in the records that others keep about us. It's pressed into the work itself, faint but unmistakable, waiting patiently for someone willing to look closely enough to see it. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments what stayed with you the most. We read every single one, and we love hearing your thoughts. If you believe stories like Abigail's deserve to be told and remembered, hit subscribe and join our community, because every share helps carry these voices a little further. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.